It was a mixed methods approach. Both primary and secondary data was collected. A survey was carried out at household level, where we interviewed using a coded questionnaire, 1,187 at the household level, respondents at household level were randomly selected, working with the local chiefs, local LC1 chairpersons in the districts. We targeted 60 communities where we administered these questionnaires in 20 districts in different parts of the country. 46% were male, and 54% of the respondents who were surveyed during the household coded questionnaire were female. So the majority were actually female of our respondents, and slightly more than the men. We also carried out a lot of focused group discussions and key informant interviews. 2,690 respondents in the FGDs and key informant interviews. 70 FGDs and 73 key informant interviews were carried out during the process of collecting this information. The number of respondents per district, or by each of the 20 districts, is indicated there. The highest had a selection, randomly selected, of 60, and the lowest was 49. And the districts were selected to represent sub-regions. We used the UBO's statistical districts. At the time when the sampling was done and selection of the districts, there were 112, but I've been informed they have since increased in number. For the focused group discussions in the green and the key informant interviews in the slight yellow, we try to show how many per district were conducted, and we have a full list of the people we spoke to and their names and their contacts and their places of residence, so that in future we can refer and follow up on some of the discussions that we carried out. We collected a lot of information. It was both qualitative and quantitative. So the quantitative information was analyzed using AP info for entering into a statistical package, and the information was subsequently transferred into SPSS for generating descriptive statistics. We are working around with the statisticians to help us do correlations. We have already received a request from one of the partners. They want to understand sector-specific analysis around their issues. That is one of the things we need to carry forward, but for now, we'll just do a presentation of some of the findings as they are. You will see on the blackboard, on the whiteboard, in the process of analyzing the qualitative information, we generated a method around identifying codes to categorize the responses on the basis of themes and sub-themes. We wrote them on cards. For every card, we had one issue, and we put these cards on the floor where we did the analysis, and we tried to group them in order to identify themes which were consistent. And for every district, we did card sorting. And on the national synthesis is the result of a collation of data which has been analyzed on a district-by-district basis. But it has been an interactive process that was informed by backward and forward reference to both for every tool that was administered, for every exercise, we used participatory methods. For every exercise that was undertaken, there was an exercise report. The exercise reports were used for generating district reports. And for all the district reports, we extracted issues and enriched them with the exercise reports. And we extracted cards on the basis of which we were able to aggregate this information. This is a more analog way of doing this qualitative analysis, and it's more enriching. There is a computer software which analyzes qualitative information, but you lose a lot of information in the process. So for us, we do it the analog way because it is very interactive, it's backward and forward, and extremely enriching you can identify issues, and once you have, it is difficult to forget them, and you keep moving along with the issues. Amongst the respondents we interviewed, 18 to 35 years were the majority, about 53%. The majority were also married, and this is quite significant because we selected them randomly, and we ended up with the majority being people who are aged between 18 and 35. And remember, in this country, we have significant challenges with trying to understand a small part of the population aged between 18 and 35. We seem at a loss in terms of how to deal with it, what to do. And civic education will provide to us a pointer in terms of how to understand how to deal with some of this important section of our population. A significant percentage of the people we spoke to could read and write, 78%. But we also had a very unfortunate number of 22% read or write in a language. Remember, the largest percentage of our population is 18 to 35, and a significant part of this population includes some of those who are unable to read and write. So we have a generation of Ugandans who are young, energetic, and unable to read and write. The highest level of education attained, we still had 13.8% of the population who had no form of education at all. And this is not a contradiction that the people who could not read and write were 22%, and those who had no education were 13.8%. It means that there are some people who, even without going to school, are able to read. They read in their local languages. And that is one of the significant issues with civic education. Most of our deliveries, if it is not packaged in the local language, it becomes difficult to reach those which is intended to reach, because people read their local languages, they understand their local languages. Many people can write their name. They have basic literacy, even if they don't have formal qualifications. Most of them did not have any responsibilities in their communities. There were a few LOCs, there were some who were members of groups, others who were religious leaders, mobilizers. They had so many other things to do, but the majority did not have responsibilities in their communities. They were ordinary people in their communities. So we think these views could represent the perspectives of ordinary people in these communities. And most of them were crop farmers. The majority were crop farmers, although some of them were involved in trade, others had self-employment, some were involved in some other skilled employment in the rural settings. Some of them had secondary activities, but the majority didn't have. So you are dealing with people who are vulnerable to poverty. The findings from UBOS suggest that people's ability to move out and remain out of poverty depends on their ability to diversify their sources of income outside of agriculture, combining agriculture with something else. Here you are, the majority, the main source of income is crop production, and the majority, they have no secondary economic activities. So it means you are dealing with a large section of the population whose vulnerability to poverty could be high. So what were the forms of civic strengthening which we encountered from the analysis of the findings in the comprehensive review? My eyes tell me that there could be some people at the back who can't read, but I'll try and explain. We went to the field. We wanted to structure the engagement around 16 themes. We listed them down, and we asked them to list for us any other theme if they didn't find what they had been, the civic education training, seminars and workshops they had been involved in did not include any one of the themes, and no one did. They were comfortable within the 16 themes. And for each of the themes, each one of them was a multiple response. We asked them, between 2013 and 2018, can you list for us the seminars, meetings, and workshops in forms of trainings that you were involved in on any issue. And for us, one of the discoveries is that at the lowest level, the distinction between the themes of what is civic education and what is not civic education becomes extremely difficult, because for them, any form of training is a form of getting knowledge. We consider that as a form of civic education, as long as they were taken through a bit of learning about government, the workings of government, about their communities, analyzing their problems. So we listed these themes. And the majority of the people had participated, had been received training, a meeting, a workshop in voter education. It was the most prevalent form of civic education that was taking place between 2013 and 2018 for the majority of the respondents, 53.7. The second was domestic violence awareness and management. There is a lot of initiative that have gone in the different communities by different organizations, state and non-state, in issues of domestic violence awareness and management. Third was human rights awareness and respect for the rule of law by both the Uganda Human Rights Commission as well as civil society organizations who are focused on issues of rights awareness in these communities. And I think we need to commend these organizations, the Electoral Commission, we need to commend organizations doing domestic violence, and the Human Rights Commission, and those organizations doing awareness on issues of rights and obligations. Third was awareness of civic responsibilities and obligations, then analyzing, addressing community problems, political tolerance. Patriotism comes a distant 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then you can see at the bottom of the table, for us it was a bit puzzling. The things we think are central to democracy are those which were least attended by the respondents. Check at the bottom of the table. Last, demanding accountability from the central government. We think that in strengthening democratic governance, that should be the primary. There should be a lot of meetings. There should be so many people, educating people. So many people should have said we are attending meetings and say, demanding accountability from central government, but it was the last. Demanding accountability from political leaders. Demanding accountability from local governments. How to undertake advocacy, effective public speaking, and corruption. We think that for us, the only explanation can be in the fact that between 2013 and 2018, the focus in terms of the seminars, trainings, and workshops shifted. When decentralization was launched in 1999, and 10 years later thereafter, there was significant engagement on the issues of decentralization of powers, holding local governments accountable, holding the central government accountable, to the extent that now it ceases to be an issue. And yet for us, we think we need a continuous engagement to keep enlightening people around these issues. Most of the civic education that was taking place was on the voter education, domestic violence, human rights awareness, and civic responsibilities and obligations. And the other key issues which we thought were significant to democracy, there were very few people who said they had participated in these kinds of trainings in the 5-year period. There are a number of things which we can infer from by looking at each one of these in terms of the age of those who participated in these trainings, in terms of the gender of these participated in the trainings, their marital status, and their education levels. And I'm just going to make a trial with a few. In terms of voter education and training and gender, 52% of those who said they participated were male and 47% were women. Which means if an electoral commission or a civil society organization which is doing voter sensitization goes into the community, remember the majority of the people we interviewed were women. But here you have the majority of those who said they attended voter education being men. So in terms of going forward, I think those of us who do civic education, we need to be aware that there are structural inhibitions for women to participate in engagements around voter education, which we need to take cognizance of going forward as civil society organizations. When you look at age, the green stands for 18 to 35. Then the second bar is 35 to 55. And then the brown one is 55 years and above. Now, the majority of those who participated in voter education were youth. 34% were 35 to 65. 14.4 were older persons. Now, if majority of the largest percentage of those who are participating are youth, and we are saying that a significant population of the youth have not gone to school, we are saying that there is a way in which we need to be cautious, to be aware that if we have to increase civic engagement on the issues of participation in voting, we have to pay attention to the demographics of the constituency that is participating in these elections. We have tried to relate voter education with the levels of education, and some interesting patterns emerge. The first three bars is those who had no education at all. Then the second three bars is for primary education. Then the third is for secondary, and the other is for post-secondary. Now, what is clear is that the highest percentage of those people who said they participated in voter education had primary education, said they had attended primary school. When it goes to secondary school, it goes down to 31%. This is 41.5. It goes back down to 31%. Then those who had post-secondary education, it goes down to 14.7. Now, it means that if you had no formal education, which comes at, it was the lowest, 10%. Those who had no education at all, the first bar, 10.5%. It means that the people who have no education are not likely to participate in voter education compared with those who have some education. But that is not enough. If you leave it at that, you have missed the point. That if you look at primary education, high. Secondary education, it goes down. Post-secondary education, it is very low. It means amongst those people who said they had some education, the higher you go in your educational level, the lower your participation in issues of voter education is. So we think that because they are educated, they know what to do. Then we don't target them. I think we need to also to bring on board a constituency which is filled with apathy. The people who speak English like me. Most of the times we don't want to vote, and we complain when the voting does not favor us. So this graph means while there is a problem with no participating in voting for those who have no education, it is not enough to stop there. That the higher you are in terms of your education, the lesser there is a tendency for you to get involved in some of these education things. If you look at domestic violence awareness by gender, the males attended domestic violence awareness and prevention than the female. I think the organizations targeting domestic violence have changed strategies. They no longer target women, they target the men, because they think that if you don't target men with gender sensitization and training, gender mainstreaming and whatnot, all the training you give to the women goes to waste. I think it is a very good strategy and should be encouraged, but this doesn't mean that the women should be left behind. If you look at age, for those who participated in domestic violence awareness and prevention, the majority of those who attended the training were aged 16 to 35. The others were 36 to, the 52% for 16 to 18 to 35, and 34% for the 36 to 55, and 12.5% for the 56 and above. I think that even if it is the young who need this attention more, most of the domestic violence cuts across the age categories, while the youth are more enthusiastic and are targeted directly because they are the future, husbands and wives. I think the older persons also need to be targeted so that you don't have a skewed involvement in civic education on domestic violence prevention and management. If you look at the levels of education, the similar pattern we noticed in voter education emerges. 41% of those who had attended these trainings had the primary education, but this was the lowest. The lowest was those who had none, 8.7, had attended trainings, civic education trainings on domestic violence. Primary education was the highest with 41, then secondary education is lower than primary at 35, and post-secondary education is 15%. One conclusion you can make, if you have no education, you are not as likely to attend domestic violence prevention as the person with education. That's what the graph is telling us. But that is not enough if you stop there. If you have some education, primary, secondary, and post-secondary, you are more likely to participate in domestic violence prevention. You are less likely, the higher your education, the less likely you are to participate in domestic violence prevention. And yet we know some of the educated people are the most, some of the victims, they grab widows' properties, they grab relatives' properties. So targeting, when we're targeting and doing civic education within, on domestic violence prevention, we need to be cautious about these trends. You will call a meeting and it will be only the people with primary education who will come because they are eager to learn something. The people who have secondary education and post-secondary education, they know it all. They will not want to come to these meetings, and yet they perpetuate much of the abuses which happen at the domestic level. And we have done that disaggregation for all the 16 thematic areas of civic education that we're involved in. Let me briefly go to the medium for the delivery of civic education. We asked the respondents, how was this civic education? What was the source of information on good governance? And the respondents, 74% said they received their information on democracy and good governance, which was most relevant from FM radio stations. But how many civil society organizations have called all the news readers, news presenters, programmers, directors, anchors, and taken them through civic education training? Because these people are on air from 5 to 5. They are busy speaking and saying things, and people learn by listening to FM radio stations. But as civil society organizations, we only go there to take our message. We want airtime on radio stations to say what we want to say. We have not targeted the people who work in these organizations, because 74% of the respondents said the information they consider most relevant on democracy and good governance, they get it from FM radio stations. But that was not the most surprising. The second was religious sermons and teaching. Our churches, they are no longer separating what belongs to Caesar from what belongs to giving to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. These sermons are becoming extremely political. You find them talking about human rights. You find churches talking about government excesses. You find them talking about corruption. What does this mean? As civil society organization, we need to find a way of working with religious institutions, because what we want is this information about democracy and good governance, this information about civic education to be heard by all people who hear. Many people don't attend workshops, but they go to church. If you go through the religious institution, they go to mosques on Friday. If you listen to Kutuba on Friday, coming from Okibuli, Muzata is a person who is fond of, making political statements. So we need to target these people. We need to give them some civic education so that they can understand what they are saying and its implication for this country. 41 said they get most of the best information from the most relevant information on good governance from political rallies and campaigns. That is understandable. But listen to this. There are 41%, 41.5% of the people who receive relevant information, information they considered relevant for democracy and good governance from barrier events. I don't come from central Uganda, but those of you who have been in a barrier anywhere in central Uganda, you do know that if somebody has buried and the people from town are going to Mpiji, Nikiana, Mkaka there to bury, the barrier becomes a market. They sell everything from clothes to muchom. So with civic education stakeholders, this is our opportunity. We need to find ingenious ways of working around without making it look like inconvenience for the bereaved families. All this information is saying people are receiving information from non-conventional, non-formal channels. We are targeting schools, Patriotism Secretariat and Patriotism Secretariat, National Cause and Patriotism. They are targeting secondary schools, but there are people getting information from barriers. They are getting information from elsewhere. Only a small percentage, 39, said they get it from television stations. Surprisingly, many get it from social network groups. Social network groups include groups of where you bond together, people like mind. You bond together, you work together, you help each other. Monomukabi, working in groups, savings groups. They get information. You would expect that newspapers are good. Newspapers rank 23.4 for the editors, for the owners of newspapers. You need to think a different way. You are not reaching people with their newspapers in the villages. This is collected from 20 districts. People who have access to smartphones are getting a lot of information on social media. And you know the misinformation. Civil society, we need to find a way of being present in the social media so that the information that we need to pass on civic education is not misinterpreted, so that we send the best message. Very many people listen to, WhatsApp, the information which is flying around. There are people who have a lot of time. I even wonder, the people who live outside this country know about this country even faster and more than some of us who stay here. Somebody has been killed, you get a WhatsApp from a WhatsApp group based in Dubai, in the UK, which means that there is a lot of flow of information on social media. As Center for Basic Research, we are working with social media influencers to make sure that we take our message forward. I think civil society, we need to learn new ways of communicating our civic education messages. The most relevant social network. You said there was social network and we think they are important, but the most relevant were barazas. Some of these are government organized and some of them are community organized. The VSLs, workplaces. There are very few of us who target workplaces for purposes of delivery of social information. Surprisingly, we had cell. The born-again people have their cell meetings. They said sometimes there is a lot of information which is beyond spiritual. It also turns into something like political. We have Malwa drinking groups. If you have been to a Malwa drinking group or know what happens in a Malwa drinking group, they discuss all topics from economics to politics. They discuss from sexuality to violence to corruption. They are masters of all information. If we could target them and try to influence, I don't know how. We are thinking. But this is what the findings seem to be telling us. The different fora, I think I've mentioned some of them. The interactive discussions are the most useful. They don't like to be lectured. They complain that we people who come with ties, when we go for civic education, we talk to ourselves. We don't give them time to speak to us. We talk past each other. We go delivered because we have a deadline and you have traveled 3 hours in a car. You are trying to beat a deadline so that you come back to the comfort of a lodge in the nearest trading center or town. You spend 6 hours doing civic education. For you, that is a tick. But the contact time with the communities you have gone to train is less than 1 hour because you have 3 hours to drive, 3 hours to come back, and 1 hour. In between there, you will say completely nothing. The few you will say will remain under the table where you have been meeting. So they don't get anything out of it, but they preferred the interactive discussions and role plays. It's more engaging, it's more interactive. So if we are going to talk about civic education, we need to find a different way. It is good to have lectures, handouts, and the PowerPoint. There are people who do civic education using PowerPoint in the village. You have to do it in a different way. The number of meetings that they said they had attended in 1 year, the majority had 1 to 3 meetings. Now, if in 12 months, the majority of the people are saying they have 1-3 meetings, it means that our contact point, our contact time is very small. And yet we are saying in Europe, where democracy started from, where people have values, for them they do civic education every day from nursery. For us here, people hear us 3 times. People have heard about us 1 to 3 times. It means they are yearning, and we are not able to fulfill their yearning. What do? They learn what they learn. And you can imagine what they learn. The hours spent in the last meeting, the majority said they had spent half a day. That is 1 to 4 hours. This supports the other. Says that the amount of time we have with communities for doing civic education work is extremely limited. So we need to put on our boots and carry our tents and go and camp in the places if we want really to have an enduring change. The use of television as a source of information on civic education. How often national news watched on television? I don't have a TV. The majority of the people, the TVs now are more available, very cheap, but we still found in 1,187 people we spoke to, half of them said they didn't have a TV. So this civic education we do on TV, we'd better spend that money. It's okay to do it, but we cannot do that only. We also need to do something else. How often do you listen to national news? We've spoken briefly in the previous slides on sources of information on democracy and good governance, and I said FM radio stations. Now we asked, how often do you listen to national news on radio? Almost every day, 54.5. They listen to national news. And some of them have news which is spiced up with comedy. Supposing we do the same, we spice up our news with civic education. It would be more appealing because 54% of the people listening to national news is a good number to start from. But the worrying is that you have 21% of people in this Uganda of Museveni of 2019 who say they don't have radios. 21% is unacceptable. How can people not have even a small radio to listen to news? The ownership and use of cell phones. Do you have a cell phone? 24% said they don't. 76% say they have. Do you use cell phone for obtaining information on civic education? 59% did not answer. Yes, 29% people said they use their cell phones to access information on civic education. And then 11% said they don't. I think this is a gadget which we can use, especially by short messaging on civic education issues. If somebody, you know how people who have weddings use SMSs. So we've used them for connections, for purposes of raising resources for our weddings. We have not used them for purposes of generating information for civic education. It would reflect if we had. Some of the instruction materials that are, learning materials that are being used in civic education, we've talked about the role plays, visual materials. People think lecture notes, third role, seminars and workshop, fourth, reading pamphlets, fifth, and video shows, sixth. They think that interactive ways in terms of delivering this as an avenue is still important, although visual materials are also good. I think lectures come third. Fourth is the issue of seminars and workshops. We need to do beyond going in seminars and workshops in these communities. when we're talking about civic education. Let's briefly look at the ranking of service providers. We're comparing state MDAs and the non-state, the civil society organizations. Those who deliver the civic education on human rights awareness, the majority were government agencies, 44.3%, the lowest bar, the longest, said the most of the civic education on human rights was by government agencies, which means that is commendable. Human Rights Commission, people know that you are doing some work there. But they also recognize that 38% that there are NGOs doing human rights awareness in these communities. Voter education, still the largest percentage was government agency, which means the Electoral Commission is doing a lot of work, but we also have civil society. Supposing civil society we are doing a little bit more in terms of voter education beyond registration and 2 months to the voting exercise. We have this continuous voter education so that the difference between the government agencies and the NGOs reduces. By the way, we asked them on the service providers, we included educational institutions, religious institutions, national politicians, political parties, district-based politicians, and also included cultural institutions. As some of the service providers, we wanted them to tell us whether they deliver civic education. In terms of civic responsibilities and obligations, the government was still ranked highest, then followed closely by NGOs. If you compare teaching citizens in the working of government, NGOs and government are faring a bit closely, and engaging duty bearers, government still tops. You still have NGOs slightly below it. If you look at demanding accountability from central government now, pay attention. These ones we said, very few people attended them, and it is where NGOs are ranking highest. Our inference is that we are busy making a lot of noise in Kampala, but for the things which the communities understand is our responsibilities in the ground, we are not doing it. Because demanding accountability from central government, it was the lowest. And they are saying it is mainly delivered by who? By NGOs. And then government comes in. It means we are not doing enough of that which the communities understand as our primary obligation. If you look at demanding accountability from local government, NGOs top, then government agencies second. And this was the second last. It means that we are not doing much. For those that the NGOs came on top, some of the civic education thematic areas out of the 16, which were ranked lowly in terms of those which were attended by the respondents we spoke to. It means that civil society organization, we still have a long way to go. We are leaving a lot to government to take the day. We should need to be engaging them more in the areas where they have a comparative advantage, but also in the areas where civil society organizations appear to be having a comparative advantage. This is meshed up. I thought this would visually enable us to capture. The green one are those which were ranked first. And then second is that color purple. So we tried to identify so that you could easily see that there are some areas where the government ranks highly. One of the things which this study tried to find out was on the question of national values. It's a very interesting discussion which you need to listen to. There are weaknesses, there are challenges with the written curriculum, but we have not paid any attention to the unwritten curriculum. So that study will be available and we will engage some of the issues we have been engaging with them. Somebody asked how CBL and the kind of message to target these people. I think that's the wrong approach. As CBL, we are a center for research. We build capacity for research organizations. For granted, sometimes when you go through it in a different environment, it becomes obvious how much you didn't know, how much you don't learn in the university. Many people write proposals, have degrees for which they have not done research. So for those who have difficulties in applying their knowledge from the universities, we can help you to structure it in such a way that it can be beneficial to you. So one of the main components is to work with civil society and strengthen that. Okay, it's not we are not know-it-all. We have Wizards, which is building our capacity. Wizards Foundation is building our capacity in terms of media. Crime, road rage, and accidents. I have said this in a number of meetings. I have been talking about it, and I will repeat it. It did not happen, and the two cars met. Then we all moved out. And he told me, I told him, why are you driving like that? He said, Munanga in Uganda yafu. So you are in the wrong and blaming it on Uganda. So we have sunken so low that every wrong is justified that on the road. You know, you find these people who drive these pioneer buses. My thinking is that they start from Boda and then somehow learn how to drive cars and they go into buses. You find them also meandering and they are taking panyas even where the bus can't fit, but the guy is busy driving the bus through there. But we need to start somewhere. We need to start slowly. Every time we speak to people, they come back the next day and say, that message was good. We think you should be talking to many people. What the people in the Ministry of Education are thinking about is to introduce comprehensive sexual education. Who told those people that the comprehensive sexual education is the biggest problem in this country? And nobody is speaking about civic education. No donor is going to come and give you money to develop a comprehensive civic education program. That is a patriotic duty of Uganda as a country and the government to develop civically competent citizens. Without a civic education policy in this country, without a law on civic education, we are going to start this incoherent. Somebody has been talking about uncoordinated. It is true, they are not coherent, they are not coordinated. Look at the MDS, ministries, departments, and agencies. Every one of them receives every year. We did a study on the public financing of civic education in the budget. They receive money on community mobilization, sensitization, and awareness. Do you know what UNRWA does with it? Wherever there is a road project, they will look for a cardboard and write aid skills. So when you ask them, how do you use civic education, your funds for community mobilization, sensitization, and awareness? We do billboards on aid skills because the road workers have a lot of money. They tend to go in for whatever passes in a scarf. So they think that civic education for all is about educating people on HIV/AIDS. If you go to Ministry of Gender, they are doing civic education. If you go to OPM, they are doing civic education. We need a policy passed yesterday. I don't know why the cabinet is sitting on this. We need a policy passed yesterday so that we can begin to think systematically about how to coordinate, how the departments of government can coordinate each other, can coordinate with each other, can coordinate with civil society who are involved in civic education. No country in this world has developed without a strong civic education program. England, in Denmark, all these developed countries, they have a very strong civic education program. We will build roads and have double-storied highways and flyovers, but people will still destroy these roads because they are not civically what? Empowered. People are looking for jobs, their industries here, Mosaic to Yam. It is because there is a certain level of intellectual civic skills that they are lacking. I have found a few people who go to Chankwanz, Nali, and everybody who returns from Chankwanz and say, what they tell me is not what I found there. I wish every Ugandan can go to Chankwanz. Is it possible for us to try and think of a different way of doing civic education without making it look like the government is brainwashing people, the government is indoctrinating people? Because the people who want to discourage civic education, who want this kavuyo, you know, kulira mukavuyo. There are people here who are professionals. Every time there is a confusion, they are there waiting. They don't want things which are done orderly. And you cannot have an orderly citizen, a knowledgeable citizen. Part of civic education is giving people thinking skills. How many of us here who have been to university, and I suppose all of us have attended a module or a class which is called critical thinking? How many? You are lucky ones. Do you know how different it makes you to study how to think? And this is what civic education is all about. Changwazi is trying. We need to support them. We need to depoliticize whatever it is said about Changwazi or done in Changwazi. So that civic education can be done properly. We need to structure it in a different way. I'm not a spokesperson for Changwazi. We need to think going forward, because what we have done for us, we are stumbling on things. The more we mine the data, the more things become obvious. The more we engage with the data, familiarize with it, get used to it, the more we find things which we ordinarily take for granted. I think we need to ask the questions which this study is asking. Why are we not engaging in the kind of civic education that we are supposed to be engaging with? Why is everybody running into the easy things to do? I mean, even for political parties, a good citizen who is civically empowered is good for UPC or FDC as it is for NRM. So it should not be that this political party or the other. Civic education is civic education and period. A good citizen, civically empowered, is a citizen who even FDC will require or a Alliance for National Transformation will require, is a good citizen for the country. We want to put it beyond the narrow interpretation of political affiliations, because civic education is civic education. A bad citizen, a disempowered citizen, a civically less competent citizen is bad for everybody, is bad for the whole country. So we need to start with children, we need to start with them young. The earlier we revise the national curriculum, the better, so that we can start to think civic education for all people, all ages, at all levels. I'll leave my colleagues to respond to the issues of national values. I think so, yes. The rest, we accept. The rest, really, we appreciate it. And it's going to help us to think of how to make the most of this. We are not in the habit of filing our reports and saying, tick, accomplished. This is a product delivered. No. For us, this is a thinking process now. It starts now. We're going to try and translate this into something and inform what we are going to do next, even beyond the confine of DGF. We are working closely with the Ministry of ICT and National Guidance. We would like a stronger collaboration with Human Rights Commission. We would like a stronger cooperation with the Electoral Commission, so that we can understand how we can be helpful. We need to engage as civil society. Electoral Commission, every time you go there, fill a form. This is not around in the field. What? It's good we have you. We will start to engage. We have invited the Electoral Commission to come and give us a talk. We want to engage with voter education and civic education and have issues to speak. There are issues to speak with you. You are very inaccessible. You are busy people. It is because we have by-elections all the time. This regular by-election is a sign of civic incompetence of citizens. We shouldn't be having most of these by-elections. So we need to start a discussion. We would like to invite you to come and speak to us. We're very grateful that the institution which we would initially feared most was the UPDF. But all the people who have attended seminars which have been organized, where keynote speakers have been UPDF, have left extremely impressed by the level of intellect possessed by the people who are in the UPDF. We would like to engage with the police. Every time, you see, I don't know what happens to the traffic police in this country. Every time there is a jam, the policemen are absent, they are reading newspapers or talking on phone. They are on the road when there is no traffic. You go now, they are on the road. In the evening, they are nowhere to be seen. Who said that policemen work from 7 to 5? Policemen are supposed to work the whole night. They work in shifts. They have been recruiting, every time you hear in the newspapers, they are recruiting policemen. Where do they take them? You end up on the road. I went to Ivory Coast, as ramshackle as it is. Every 10 meters, there is a traffic policeman. He just stands there without saying anything. You find one line. What is wrong with us? Even these policemen need civic education.
I think the key message that we want to put out there is that we are focused too much on the formal avenues of delivering civic education. We have put a lot of attention on formal and conventional civic education delivery mechanisms. We have forgotten, we have not paid as much attention to the non-formal and the non-conventional delivery mechanisms of civic education. Most of our people don't listen to radios. Most of our people do not own televisions. Those who are interested in listening to other programs. We have not had a dedicated engagement through conventional, formal, as well as the non-conventional and the non-formal mechanisms of delivering civic education to our population. The reason why we focus more on the formal and the conventional delivery mechanisms is that we have structured civic education as an undertaking for people who go to school. That's why patriotism is mainly delivered to secondary school children. We have a patriotism corps, Secretariat of Patriotism Corps. They target secondary school children. Yet, it is a message which needs to be listened to people who are not in school, out of school, or even never been to school. So I think we need to rethink the way we look at civic education and the way we deliver civic education to the citizens of this country. You know, we need to move away from structuring civic education, because civic education should be starting from the family. Civic education should start in the settings of the homes. If we leave civic education to the confines of schools, we ignore a significant percentage of the population. People get information through many ways. The formal mechanism may not be the most appropriate to deliver certain information, because the information is not packaged in a manner in which those who listen to it are agreeable to it. Take the case of a burial event, a cultural event, a religious event. You deliver your spiritual message, you deliver your other message, but in addition to that, we have a message to pass on to the population on civic education. There are things about civic education which are key to the nation that we are unable to deliver when we have to deliver it. Because, for example, you want to target children when they are in school, and yet you could deliver this information packaged appropriately through the burial ceremonies, religious functions, through the social networks that communities, around which communities organize. I think the social networks are extremely important. We need to move out of the box and think a little more creatively if we have to make headway with regards to civic education. That is important because part of the problems we have with governance is because we have not given civic education the importance that it deserves. Most of the developed countries where this democracy which we practice, where we inherited it from, do civic education as a consistent and systematic undertaking of government. In Uganda here, it was removed from all the curricula in the education system. And yet, in most of these countries, the civic education starts from kindergarten. There is message packaged to young children, passed on to them conveniently to understand why you need to love your country, why you need to be a good citizen, what the responsibilities and obligations of a good citizen are, what you need to do to give back to the state, rather than demanding accountability from the state when as a citizen you've not partake of your responsibilities. We have a level of apathy. There is a high apathy amongst people who never went to school, because when you talk English, deliver it in English, nobody will understand it. If you use a translator simultaneously translate, you lose a lot of time and you lose a lot of information. Those who have some level of education tend to be interested in some of these meetings, especially those who have minimum of primary school education, because they think it is every opportunity for learning is an opportunity they would like to embrace. The people with more education, secondary, the higher you go in your level of education, the less they tend to be interested in participating in civic education. That all means that the messages we are giving to them do not appeal to them because their practical needs of survival demand something else. They think that they have the knowledge even when they know they do not have. They think it is not for them. That's why you find a level of apathy amongst very highly educated people. They don't vote. They don't want to go and vote because they think it's a waste of time. And yet, if there was setting examples by the people who are highly educated, it would go a long way to help those who look up to them as role models in their societies. Okuziika mu Buganda kyafuuka kya buguzi, kyafuuka kya ttunzi. Omuntu bw'afiirwa, buli wagenda okuziika wabaawo akatale. Batunda ku buli kintu okuviira ddala ku byamaduuka okutuuka ku mmere. Abanakibuga bwe bagenda okuziika bakozesa opportunity eyo, ab'ebyalo bakozesa opportunity eyo okubaako akasente ke beekolera. Nze ndowooza kyandibadde kintu kirungi singa naffe tusobola okwenyigiramu ne tulaba nga wali abantu abakuŋŋaanye fe abasomesa abantu ebikwatagana ne citizenship ne tubaako obugambo bwe tubasuulirayoko obutonotono mu kifo ky'okwesibira ku masomero twesibire mu classroom. Era olina oyiiya tokikola lwa kunyiiza bali abafiirwa, ogikola mu ngeri ya kimpowooze kiringa ng'omuntu akuyega akalulu era mpola mpola olaba nti barriers zaafuuka political platforms. Politicians bo batusinga messages zaabwe bo tebalinda nti ate luno lumbe ate zino kyaki, bo we basanga we bakuŋŋaanya abantu we batandikira. Naye kati ffe abamu sooka n'olinda bakusasule, oyagala okole semina okole workshop ogibudgetingire, naye ng'ate abantu abasinga obungi ebyo tebabyejjumbira. Baba baagala wuliwo omusanze mu katale bw'abanga agenze ku mukolo era awo n'omuliisayo ekigambo. Eggwanga lino lyagenda ne liwa abantu eddembe, abantu boogera ku bye baluma. So kati aba church nabo bantu nabo balina eddembe lyabwe. So kati bwe batuuka mu church og'okulira omubuulizi ng'agamba obulyake butuyitiriddeko, abantu batutulugunya, babba ssente za gavumenti, naye eyo becoming a political platform naye ng'ate eri mu church. Eyo message tosobola mugaana giyisa agireeta mu kusomesa mu kugunjula, naye kyebeerabira nti nekyokugunjula abantu ebikwatagana n'okwagala ensi yaabwe, okukolagana n'abantu abalala, okwagalana nga Bayibuli bwegamba, naye message tulina obbayambako ffe aba civil society, tulina obba training abali mu church, mu mosques, tubabuulire kiki kye balina obuulira abantu, tukkaanye nabo, si kumala gatoolayo buli kimu kye baagala ne bakiwaayo eri mu bantu. Twanditudde nabo abakugu mu bya civic education ne tubasomesa. Civil society organizations tezifuddeeyo nnyo kutuukirira abantu abakulira amachaches n'emizigiti okubasomesa ebikwatagana ne civic education, ebintu bya democracy naki. So kati bo boogera ebibaluma mu ngeri gye balabamu nti esinga obbaganyulwamu.
Yogera ku butakwatagana wakati w'okusoma okw'omu masomero ne civic education.
Tekitegeeza nti omuntu bw'oba osomye nti oba omanyi ebikwatagana n'eggwanga lyo. Abantu abasinga obungi mu ensi ezaakulakula nedda, abaana batandika obbasomesa nga bakyali bato, batandikira mu kindergarten nti lino ggwanga lyo, ojja okwagala eggwanga lyo, olina okukola buli kimu kyonna kyonna n'oyagala eggwanga lyo. Abantu abamu abasinga obungi tebaasoma, messages ezo tebalina opportunity ya kuzifuna batandika okutegeera nga bali ku masimu bali ku maradio bintu bye bawulira ebikwatagana n'obulungi bw'ensi babiwulira ku masimu bawulira ku ma FM radio so kati information gye bafuna egenda nebanga kwegamba tekwatagana na bulungi bwaki tubalekeredde obwo obuzibu bwaffe abayifu tetufuddeyo nnyo kwetegereza nti tulinamu abantu b'ebika ebyenjawulo mulimu abantu abataasoma ennyo mulimu abantu abatayingirako ddala mu ssomero twandibadde nabo nga tubatuukirira tugezaako nabo okubasomesa basobole okutegeera nti waliwo ebintu ebikolebwa mu buntu olina okubeera n'abantu mu buntu bulamu olina okwagala ensi yo olina okwagala abantu si kusosolagana mu mawanga si kukola bintu nga eggwanga binaaliiza emabega tetwagenze nnyo ku bali mu university twakomye ku bali mu secondary ne post secondary omuntu bw'akoma mu secondary n'oyo akome mu high school aba alowooza nti amanyi mu luzungu tumuyita half baked abantu abalowooza nti bamanyi nga yate tebamanyi be basingirayo ddala obuzibu mu nsi y'eggwanga muno tebaagala kuyiga beefuula nga bamanyi ebintu babikwata kifuula nnenge ate bw'ogezaako basomesa baba tebaagala bintu kubiwuliriza naye ndowooza twandibadde nga tuli bakakamu n'oba nga oli muyivu nga wayiga buli muntu bw'omuwuliriza kyayogera omufunako ekyokuyiga naye bo tebaagalirako ddala civil society tekoze kimala ogwo musango gwaffe civil society tekoze kimala ogwo musango gwaffe bantu banoonya nsimbi bantu baagala binaabaliisa family zaabwe tebafaayo okukolera kugezaako okukola ekintu kinaganyula eggwanga ne bwe yandibadde nga muntu mulala aba ayagala omulimu gw'anaakola afuneko ku musango naye kina ekyokola nti oneviira to go out of your way to do something in the interest of building a country abasinga obungi mu civil society tubadde tetukiina bulungi abamu babikola naye batono tulina kukwatira wamu n'abalala tusobole otambuza ekintu kino muno omulimu si gwa muntu omu tegugenda kuba mulimu gwa lunaku lumu ffe tukitandiseeku twagala tukyogereko tutandike mpolampola kijja tutwalira ebbanga ddene tekijja kugwa nkya n'abaana betuzadde balijja ne batandikira ffe wetukoma naye twagala batuwulirize tetujja kuddawo mu civic education tetulina policy ya civic education tetulina legislation ya civic education government sente zeteeka mu civic education ziteeka mu community awareness community mobilization ministries buli emu ekola kyeyagala twagala systematic way bwebanga epolisi ya civic education teyisiddwa bwe tunaabanga tetutaddeewo teeka likwatagana n'ebya civic education era tujja kusigalira mabega amawanga agakula edda bo civic education bakimanyi nti no ne gundi bwe batandikira gwe musingi gw'ensi zaabwe ffe civic education tugirekedde butale tugirekedde radio tugirekedde social media government erina ovaayo agambe nti no enguudo zonna tuzizimbye amafactory gonna bagazimbye naye abantu tebaagala kukola ekyo kintu kya civic education muntu balina omuyigiriza nti osooka n'okola n'olyoka ofuna ssente bali awo balinze kubba bubbi akulinda n'akuteega n'alaba nti okoze ku kasente najja n'akakunyakulako. For us, we are not looking at 2021. We are looking beyond 2021. We think that what we are starting is something much bigger than we can handle. We need everybody to come on board. We are working closely with the government agencies. We are working very closely with the UPDF. We will be bringing on board all the government MDS, ministries, departments, and agencies, so that 2021 is just a milestone. We can just do as much. This requires a very systematic, it requires a lot of effort, it requires a lot of contribution from all different sectors. We cannot look at 2021. What will go wrong in 2021 most probably has already gone wrong. We are looking at making a fresh start, starting from where we need to start. We need to start at all levels, target the young people in secondary school, out of school, never been to school, who have finished, we talk to them so that we can have some common ground to think about these issues. And because of what we do at Center for Basic Research, we have monthly expert seminars on issues of civic education. We deliberate on these issues, we articulate, we engage with the theory and practice on civic education. We invite practitioners to come and speak to us, and we engage with them. We want to be able to understand these issues in their diversity. We want people to listen to us, and we're not expecting that this is going to be an easy challenge. We're going to go slowly. It is going to take a lot of time, but we will get there. We will start slowly. We will make our contribution and let others also do their bit.
How about the last?
Most of the funding which comes for specifically civic education is appropriated from the national budget, from the consolidated fund. Without a policy, it becomes difficult for consistent funding for civic education. We need a policy to design, to describe the institutional framework within which civic education can be delivered. There needs to be structure, there needs to be institution, there is to be a definition of the nature of the civic education that is going to be delivered and the responsibilities for this delivered. There is no reason why the government should be sitting on the policy. That policy should be passed yesterday. You see, we need the law. There are many laws which have not been implemented, but for civic education, this is one which will enable to regulate the excesses that are involved in civic education, to prescribe, to describe sanctions for arbitrary actions. It is important that we've carried out research and showed the areas where possible legislation could focus. Singa magambo kunyimbira stanze eyokubiri ya national anthem ebigambo mumunya bibumonye owulira ekyo kizibu kubanga oluyimba luli mu Lungereza abatasoma be bangi. Lwaki oluyimba olwo tetulimba mu Luganda? Lwaki tetulimba mu Lunyolo oba tuluyimbe mu Lukalamoja? Baluyimbe ebigambo bisigala byebimu, tune esigala yemu, naye ng'okiyimbye mu bigambo by'otegeera. Naye omuntu omugamba ayogera ebigambo ebimu kasita ayogera sawundi esooka, abasinga obungi national anthem tebagimanyi, the importance of national anthem tebagimanyi, national flag tebagimanyi, coat of arms tebagimanyi. That's just a tip of the iceberg of the problem of identifying ourselves as a citizen of this country.
It's just briefly in English about that national anthem.
It's not everybody who is in this country who speaks English. Even those who speak English, they can at best sing the first stanza. If you asked people who are here to sing it in English, the second stanza, they would just be humming along, because you know the direction of the anthem. We've not taken a deliberate effort as citizens to try. That's an indication that there are things which are foundational that we have not paid attention to. The national anthem is it's not that it's a big thing, it's the only thing. It's an indication that there are so many things we need to pay attention to, which we have not paid attention to.
So are you suggesting maybe it should be sung in the local languages for people to understand it better?
I attended the function with primary school kids, very young one, maybe aged 5, 6, 7, and they were singing the East African anthem in Swahili. It is because they teach them in school. What we are saying, the education curriculum needs to be reviewed, overhauled. Instead of us having a comprehensive and a systematic civic education in the education curriculum, we need to start teaching these things right from the kindergarten up to the university. You see, the history of Uganda is never taught until you get to secondary school. Even then, what is taught as history of this country is not history, is an official history. There are alternative histories that we have not been teaching our children. We're learning about things which do not concern us. We need a review of the educational curriculum in order to put civic education at the heart of the education system. Most of these countries which have developed have a very systematic civic education program. You cannot develop by building roads with a human resource that doesn't understand that you need to protect those infrastructure and resources that you put up as a country.